This is Who Makes a Podcast? Conversations with your favorite podcast hosts about who they are, the shows they make, and why they make them. I'm your host, Chris Cookley, and my guest today is DJ Fluck. DJ is a graduate of Purdue University and father of twin girls, an electrical engineer by day, an aspiring media mogul and sim racer by night. DJ is the co-founder of Stadium Scene, a sports publication and networking company with a customer base of over 200 sports blogs, podcasts, and video producers. He's the host of the Stadium Scene's main event podcast, where he has interviewed people like Chris Myers, John Anderson, and Steve Lavin. In this episode, we talk about sticking with your podcast past when no one is listening, building a collaborative podcast network, how to conduct a good interview, and so much more. I've known DJ for a number of years, and you'll hear how right at the start of the episode, and I enjoyed reconnecting with him and hearing about Stadium Scene and how he's building that. There's a lot to learn in this episode, and so here is my conversation with DJ Fluck. DJ, welcome to Who Makes a Podcast.
Well, thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you. It's been a while since we've talked. So for people who don't know, we actually went to college kind of together. I think you were a couple years ahead of me, but I knew you while you were there. We both went to Purdue University. And then, we have a mutual friend, Mike, who kind of reconnected us when he realized that I make a podcast and you make a podcast, and my podcast is about people who podcast. So he said, "Hey, you should talk to DJ. He makes a podcast, and he's got some pretty cool things going on." For my listeners who don't know who you are, would you mind telling me a little bit about yourself and where you're from originally and where you are now?
Yeah, absolutely. So, on a side note, real quick, we did not live in the dorm together. I was out of there. I had moved on. I was Mike's roommate.
Yep.
He stayed behind in the dorms when I left. But we did sit together for, I believe, 2 seasons of football.
Yes.
We were in the same seating group. And do you recall there was a girl who would get really upset because somebody would be sitting in her seat when she'd show up in the second quarter? Do you have any memory of that?
I don't have a specific memory of that. I do have a very vivid memory of those 2 seasons. Every single football game, I'm pretty sure that we went to, we had, or at least I feel like I had seats that were maybe in the upper bowl, and then we would always sneak down to the lower bowl, either before the game started or as soon as the game started.
Yeah, and there was this girl who she would show up like midway through the second quarter.
Yep.
And get really upset because somebody was in her seat.
And we probably were.
Yeah, I think it was probably you.
It could have been. It very well could have been. I miss those football games. It's been a long time.
It's been a long time since I've been to a Purdue game. But on that note, I'm originally from Indiana. I grew up in a town called Kokomo, which is about an hour north of Indianapolis. As you mentioned, I ended up at Purdue University for college. And as soon as I graduated, my first instinct was, I'm going to go rent a U-Haul and I'm getting out of here. And I get out of the state, that is, and I packed up and I moved to Chicago. I haven't really told this part of the story much to people. Some people know this a lot. Most people don't. I didn't really have a job lined up. I was doing some kind of contract work, but there was a risk that I took moving to Chicago. I had an apartment. They gave me an apartment because I had a job, even though it was contract based. It was, I had to be on the road traveling. And if I wasn't traveling, I wasn't getting paid. And there could have been a point where there was no work for me to go out on the road. And then I would technically be employed, but I wouldn't be getting paid. And I kind of figured this out. I did this in August, September, and I was working the traveling job. I was living in Minnesota. And I figured to myself, I have about enough money, or I get to the end of December, I decide to go home for a while because I had an interview back in Chicago. And I said, if I don't get this job, I have about 2 months before I'm completely broke. Completely broke. And I don't know what I'm going to do. And fortunately, you can call it fate, luck, being at the right place at the right time. One, I got that job that I interviewed for. And at that point, I had just started a few months earlier dating my now wife. We've been married now it'll be 10 years in July.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And as you said in the intro, I have twin daughters who just turned 4 in January. So, early lesson is, you hear it about betting on yourself. And, you're going to hear a lot of that with what I got into and how I, got into this world. It's a lot of betting on yourself. And as far as, stadium scene goes, I have not taken anything risky, like that, where I would risk going completely broke, probably because my wife would,
You have to be a little bit more responsible now.
Yeah, right. Yeah. It's just, it's a little bit different when you're 23 years old. You have, about $2,000 cash to your name.
Yeah.
60 some $1,000 in college debt and a contract job. And you're just like, man, I'm on top of the world. And then you look back like, that was really stupid. What was I thinking? But in the end, it all worked out for me.
Yeah. Well, you're young and you can recover at that point. There's no responsibilities.
The housing market had just collapsed 4 months, 5 months earlier.
Yep.
If I had to, have my parents rent a U-Haul for me because I'm completely broke and move me back to Indiana and back to their basement, that would have been an unfortunate setback. But it didn't.
Yeah.
But I lived in the Chicago area for about 8 years. I've been in Arizona now. Wow, in June it'll be 6 years already. That's hard to believe. The best decision I ever made was moving out here. My parents, who still live in Indiana, weren't happy about it, and they especially weren't happy about it when their first grandchildren were born.
Yeah.
But I haven't seen snow in almost 6 years, and I don't really mind.
Yeah, it's interesting the path that you took. I actually had a very similar exit to Purdue, although in the opposite direction. So you moved north to Chicago without a job, essentially. And after my wife graduated from Purdue, she's a couple years behind me. But after she graduated from Purdue, we moved down to Nashville. And neither of us had jobs when we moved to Nashville. And I had a job at Purdue at the time. So she actually moved to Nashville by herself. And I commuted, not commuted. I went down every weekend to see her in Nashville for about 6 weeks. She lived down there by herself as I was trying to find a job so I could move down there with her.
Man. While
I kept my job at Purdue because it was the only income that we had.
Were you married at that point?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we were. We had gotten married a year before. So our 10-year anniversary is in June this year.
Oh, wow. Well, congratulations on that. 10 years is a big deal.
It is, yeah. And
I don't know about you, but my friends are like, you're not going to last. She's going to walk out of you after a year. I'm like, I wouldn't, if you made a bet on that, I wouldn't bet against that. But hey, here we go.
10 goes by fast. And then you have 4-year-old twin girls. I have a 4-year-old daughter, and then we just had a son. So I also have 2, but they're thankfully not the same age. So you moved to Arizona at some point, right? What drove you from Chicago to Arizona? I don't know if I got that in your story.
So it was it was actually kind of started as a joke. In 2014, my wife and I, we were looking for a vacation destination, and we always would go to Florida. And I'm like, let's do something different this year. I'm sick of going to Florida every year. And she goes, okay, where are we going? And I go, I don't know. We want to go to Scottsdale. She's like, Arizona? I go, yeah. And she goes, in the middle of the summer? I go, yeah. Like, it's not any worse than going to Florida in the middle of the summer. I mean, it's hot. And I said, one of two things is going to happen. You're going to get there, and within 12 hours, you're going to be looking at real estate, or you're going to be back at the airport with your bags getting on a plane back home. And, well, I'm here, so there's your spoiler alert.
You liked it.
Yeah, we liked it. So we went back down in, again in 2015. We went back and stayed in a different part of Phoenix, up in North Phoenix. And we ended up hiring a realtor that summer and meeting with her. We said, we're going to be moving next year. And I'm sure the realtor's like, yeah, I'm sure you are. I get people like that, like you all the time. And sure enough, next spring, again, just sheer dumb luck, one of my former customers from a previous job moved their office to Scottsdale, and they were rapidly expanding their engineering operations. And I found out about it. I got word of it through a friend who still works for the company today, and I applied, and I spent Memorial Day weekend driving my Ford Fusion with a U-Haul hooked to the back of it, and drove it across the country from Chicago into Phoenix.
So you mentioned stadium scene in your introduction, and that is, if I have this right, it's your network of sorts that you have put together. How would you describe it? What is stadium scene?
It didn't start out that way. I worked with, at my previous company before I moved out to Arizona, I had a coworker that we used to eat lunch together all the time, and we were, I don't know if you want to say bored with our jobs, but we felt we weren't really challenged, and we were kind of, rebellious, like, I don't want to work, I want to work for myself type of people.
Sure.
And we were kind of brainstorming, like, how can we do this? And we didn't really have any good ideas at the time, so we said, well, let's just, it's again, the complete wrong way of doing something. It's just like, it's become the story of my life, where I just do something the complete wrong way, and eventually I find my way back to where I should be. And we said, hey, let's build this travel guide online and see if we can get in and build some advertising on it. And, it was a blog. It was kind of like a blog. It was, but it isn't. And we didn't know what we were doing. I mean, we knew some basic coding. And again, we had the problem of most blogs is no regular traffic.
Yep.
We get a little bit here and there that somebody would stumble across it on Google somehow. Nobody came to visit. So then we said, okay, we're moving into the podcast world.
And what year is this?
This was 2017. Yeah,
Okay.
2017. So, and it was February 2017. And we said, let's do a podcast. And, we talk about sports and travel and sports travel and all that. That was what our travel guide. We built these stadium guides. They actually still exist on the site today. We had a bar and restaurant guide near the stadium too, but we unfortunately in the last 2 years had to get rid of it because so many of them have shut down.
Sure.
And I feel awful because we had some really great partners we worked with, but our model has evolved, and with so many closing down, we just couldn't keep up with it. But we were like, oh, let's feature a different city in each podcast, and then it's just like, okay, that didn't get any traffic either, and it just let's throw until something sticks. And we brought in a third host for a while, and we were talking about sports, and we were talking about just anything, and just it was just going nowhere. And I read some advice that changed things for me and changed my perspective and probably saved this whole operation. And it was, the average podcast will fail after 3 episodes.
I think I've heard that as well, yeah.
And it's, you either realize it's not for you, it's too much work, you get frustrated because nobody's listening to you. And it's, you look at it, you have I have no name recognition. I have no brand recognition. And many of us out there are in the same boat. Like, nobody knows who we are. Nobody cares who we are. If for example, controversy aside, Joe Rogan starts a podcast years ago. Joe Rogan was famous for his comedy. He was famous for Fear Factor. He's famous for, his on the UFC. He has the name recognition already. People follow him on social media already. Him jumping into the podcast world was a natural fit. It's like if he could hold a conversation with people, and obviously he can because people have jumped on that train. That makes it a lot easier than someone like me or you coming into the business and trying to break out. A bottomless pit of advertising will not solve that problem.
Yeah.
The next one was the top 1% of podcasts out there, as far as number of episodes go, is 20 episodes. So if you get to episode 20 with your podcast, you're now in the top 1%, which is just another mind-blowing stat.
There's a lot of people that dabble and don't
Yes.
stick with it.
Correct, for sure. And, dealing with what we, I'll get into that here in a second, but dealing with what we do, people come and go. We fully expect that with the model. It's the nature. People get all gung ho. They want to start their blog. They want to start their podcast, and they realize, like, this is too much work. It's work. It's not, I'm just going to hit record and just, shoot what, I don't know if I'm allowed to use profanity on here or not,
Sure.
so I won't for you. But shoot it with my friends. We're just going to talk for an hour, and we're going to be entertaining, and sponsors are going to line up at the door, and millions of people are going to listen to this show. It doesn't work that way. You are completely crazy if you think that's going to work. It's not. I'm going to save you time right now. We kind of actually discourage people from starting shows because we want to say it's a lot of work. If you're not willing to put the work in, you're not willing to suffer through those, one listen, two listens, which are your parents or your siblings or your friends, you're never going to make it. That's really about it. And where we decided to go different is there's a lot of us out there that are in the same boat together, pretty much everyone. And we said, what happens if we kind of play off of each other? We have different topics that we work on. It's like, okay, your show may be about soccer, yours may be about baseball. Like, they have very little to do with each other. But, just because I do a soccer show doesn't mean I know nothing about baseball. And, you can do that. Like, you can, work together with these people, and network together and kind of use each other's followings to kind of build each other's followings up. If I have, we have 4,000 Instagram followers, we have almost 5,000 Twitter followers, and this guy may have 200 Twitter followers, but if I come in and introduce him and say, hey, this is Bill from Bill's baseball podcast, we can have him on as a guest. We go on and vice versa. And now all of a sudden, okay, maybe some of my 5,000 followers go and check out Bill. Some of the Bill's 200 come and check out us. And now all of a sudden you're starting to kind of snowball a little bit and get that momentum going. And to further build it out, the website stadiumscene.tv, if you go there right now, it is meant as a showcase. It's not meant as this is the app you listen to your podcast on. We're meant to introduce you to people. And we've got the links right there to go subscribe. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, if you like Spotify, if you Stitcher, whatever, you click on that, it takes you right to your, open your Stitcher app on the phone or your Apple Podcast. You hit subscribe. Bob's podcast now just gained a subscriber, and from our model, we fully expect people will come and go from the site, but we also expect they're going to come back and look and see what else is new. So it's like, yeah, they're not going to listen to Bob's podcast on our website. I'm fine with that. And it's really worked out well for us.
So just to clarify, if I have a podcast that's like a sports podcast, I assume I can come to you and say, DJ at Stadium Scene, I want my podcast to be listed on your website. It's like a directory, almost kind of I don't want to say a Yelp, but kind of like a Yelp of podcasts in a specific niche.
I mean, yeah, it's similar. It's set up like a news site. Like, okay, if you were to go and look at ESPN or Fox Sports, it kind of has a similar, their website. It has kind of a similar feel. We have a headlines page at the top. And you scroll down and it's like, okay, I can go and search by category. I can go and look at all the baseball content on there, or football, whatever sport interests you. We like I said, we're setting this up as a showcase, as a sports page that, you can come in and find what you're looking for and look for something new that might interest you. You're bored with your regular podcast. We've got a whole collection. And the analogy that we've kind of come for our creation is, if ESPN and Fox Sports and Barstool are the sharks and the large fish of the sea, and we're the little, we're the minnows. You look at fish in the sea, the smaller ones, and so they're not attacked by the sharks. They school together. Yep. They work together as a school of 50 or 100 or more little fish, and as the school, they scare the shark away. And we feel we're the same way. We're that school of fish that we're hoping that our school is large enough that we scare the shark a little bit. And at the very least, we've worked with a couple people that have actually not directly because of us. I'm not taking credit for that. It's their hard work, but they've actually parlayed themselves, from being, a blogger, a podcaster. And we have a guy who works for a newspaper now as a sports writer. We have people that have contributed to the site that are writers for NBC Sports now. I mean, we've had people come through in the last couple of years that have built their way into the real journalism field. And, I like I said, I'm not taking credit for any of that, but it's still cool to know that this person was an independent podcaster on our site that all of a sudden is now working for the big time. Their dream of being part of that big organization or that big journalism organization happened for them. Yeah. And I just think that's really cool.
All right. So how many podcasts are publishing on Stadium Scene? How many do you have in your conglomerate, I guess, or your co-op?
Maybe it's pretty much a conglomerate. Yeah, it's 155 podcasts, and I would say probably 120, 130 of them are still considered active, which they produce a show more than once every 6 months or so. Mm-hmm. I mean, one of our first partners that we actually partnered with, I should have looked this up before I went, but I want to say they're closing in on episode 400. They're on episode number 8 when they joined with us.
Wow. Okay.
So I mean, people do stick around, and we're really, I'm going to go ahead and plug them. They're the Loud Americans Discussing Soccer podcast. Also, they go by the Lads. They've built up quite a following in themselves. But they've done live shows to get at bars. They were really they were kind of partner number one for us. Cool. And I hunted them down and said, hey, I've got this vision, and you can call me crazy and tell me to go away, but here's how I see it. And they saw the vision, they joined on, and this is going on 5 years now that they've been working with us, and we're just super thrilled that they continue to produce.
To that point, are you still doing outreach to bring shows on, or are you just kind of, as people come to you, you take them?
Yes and no. When we first got started, our first 35 or 40, maybe not quite that much, maybe our first 25 or 30 were outreach by me. Maybe one kind of heard something and came and reached out. But once we hit that 40 to 50 mark, word was starting to get out that people were coming to us now. And I still reach out to people, and I still try to forge partnerships with large organizations. One of them is the Hockey Podcast Network. I think they're like 35 of our shows. They kind of formed together as an alliance of independent hockey podcasters. Most of them cover a single team. Some of them are more like stats, and some are culture, hockey, interviewing related. But we partnered with them a couple of years ago when they got started, and they're a very valuable partner of ours. Or they provide a lot of our about 99% of our hockey content on the site. So it's one of those where we kind of seek these people out and talk about it and have a discussion, and maybe because they're a large organization, we treat it a little bit differently than if one person comes in.
All right. So if you look at your website, you said it's kind of like a news feed almost. So there are recent episodes from the podcast on your network that are kind of flowing into that. Are hosts uploading to your site manually, or are you dynamically grabbing their show data?
We are dynamically grabbing it. And that's one of the reasons why I think this is done so well.
What's the technology look like to do that? How are you doing that?
So it's a lot of, if a professional programmer looked at our code, they would be like, how does this even work? not like, how is this successful in working? I guess is really it works. It's I'm not a professional coder by trade. I don't
Scotch
claim
tape
to be.
and bubblegum.
Yeah, but it works. So basically, we more or less follow the same concepts that Apple Podcast does. Every podcast has what they call an RSS feed, which it's for those who don't know, it's basically this page of code that has what they call tags on them, and there'll be a tag for like the title of your episode, one for the description, one for the length of the episode, one for the link to download the episode. There's a tag for explicit that if your show is full of profanity, iTunes puts that explicit tag on your show. And this is a universal format that's been accepted by the podcasting world, and YouTube, working with videos, they have something very similar. Blogs, again, something very similar. Podcasts are the easiest, because the blogs, there are some variation to doing it. That one took a little bit more work on my part, but basically, when you go and if you use Anchor or any of the other podcast hosting companies, we use Anchor, but you upload your podcast to Anchor, and if you've registered and have it on those other sites, which Anchor will do it for you for the most part, it just shows up on Apple Podcast. It shows up on Google Play. It shows up on Spotify. And it works the same way with us. We take your feed, your RSS feed link, and we don't, iTunes or Apple Podcasts, I guess now, they scan it every couple of minutes looking for new shows. And obviously I don't have the infrastructure or the know-how or the money that Apple does, but we scan once an hour, 20 minutes after the hour for podcasts. We scan 40 minutes after the hour for videos, and at the top of the hour we look for blogs. And, it's basically, I'm just doing some basic comparisons and saying, oh, there it is. There's a new episode there. And we pull it into our database and we publish it to the site. So cool. There's no additional work that has to be done by the content creator. We tell them, keep doing what you're doing.
Just keep posting and it'll pop up automatically.
It'll pop up automatically, yep.
Are you doing anything to help facilitate any kind of cross promotion across podcasts between the shows that are on your network? Like, are you having sometimes, if you think about a podcast network like a Gimlet, they'll have Science Versus ads basically on like a reply all episode. Come check out this other podcast. It's part of the Gimlet network. Are you doing anything like that or helping?
Not to that extent, but there are definite behind the scenes things that go on. So each of our partners has access into a portal that we've built for them. And we set up a free and a premium account because I'm not doing this for free. Sure. I'm trying to make some money here. So with the free accounts, you can come in, you can put your blog or your podcast or your video channel on there, and we cap you on how many episodes we pull in a month. And then at the first of the month, we restart it and we just look for the first 2 new episodes every month. You come into the premium, we take those limits off. You can add, if you have a podcast, a blog, or multiple podcasts and a blog and a video channel and a Twitch feed, bring them all in. And, we do the social media promotion of the episodes. If you look at Stadium Scene on Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, you'll see new episodes coming in, new blog posts coming in, and those are our premium members that pay for that service. On top of that, too, we actually have what we call the MVP training camp. And we actually put together blog posts or videos with instructional guides on how can I make it better. And we, some of it is technical, some of it's like, social media. One of the posts we put in the other week is, how do you get famous people to come on your show? And without revealing too much, we provide the step-by-steps of, we've used these steps personally. This is how we got, John Anderson from SportsCenter. We went through the process of ESPN and went through their media relations department, followed that process. And the next thing I know, I've got an email coming in from John Anderson saying, hey, can you call me? This sounds cool, but I need to know a little bit more before I say yes. And next thing I know, I'm on the phone talking to a guy who I've seen on SportsCenter for the last 20 years.
Yeah.
It's just wild.
So ESPN has like an official outreach or PR department that you can say, hey, I want to interview this person.
Fox, CBS, you name it. They all have pretty much a standard process. There's a little variation between them. And the other thing too is like, it depends on the guest you're targeting. If you're thinking of ESPN, no offense, I love John Anderson, but he's not the first person you think of when you think of ESPN. He's been there for a long time. Again, another wonderful person who spent an 75 minutes. I asked him for a half hour. He gave us 75 minutes of his time and then went in and did Sports Center later that night. But, if you went and you want to go and talk to, I'm going to just say, one of the first names you think of is probably, Stephen A. Smith. Is Chris Berman even still there?
I don't know. He's the OG though, right?
Right. But Stephen A. Smith is the name you hear most often, or Michael Wilbon or Mike Greenberg. These guys are kind of the face of the network. The chances that you get a favorable response, you should temper your expectations a little bit. And then also how you approach it too is a major step to getting a response, a favorable response. And it should go without saying, you want to be professional. Don't come in and say, hey, I want 4 hours of your time to do a Joe Rogan style interview. Like, that'll never happen.
And I'm probably not going to pay you for it.
Yeah. And you have to be reasonable, respect their time, outline what you want to talk about. And it also helps too that if you come emailing from, if you have your podcast, go by a website, get an email address with your website. If you send your again, no offense, you send a Gmail to the worldwide leader PR department, the odds that they respond goes down just a little bit. They might, but seeing it as at yourshowname.com is going to get a better response than at gmail.com or at yahoo.com or whatever email you use as your personal email.
Who has been a guest that you've had that you have been most shocked said yes that they would come on your podcast?
Hands down, Chris Myers.
Okay.
Chris Myers of Fox Sports. Chris has been around for 30 years plus now. He worked for ESPN before he went to Fox. He's been covering NASCAR on Fox since 2001. He was O.J. Simpson's first interview after the acquittal of his murder trial.
Jeez.
He, as a high schooler, one of his first interviews was Muhammad Ali. He covers football games on Fox. He does baseball games. He actually works for the Cubs part-time, doing a few Cubs games a year on the Marquee channel. I mean, this guy's done it all. He's covered Super Bowls. He's there on the face of the Daytona 500 for Fox. I mean, he's covered every major sporting event in this country over the last 30 years. He has interviewed just legends of the sport, and I can't even imagine the numbers that are in his phone book.
Yeah. So how did you go about preparing for that?
That's a great point. One is you need to find out everything you can about this person. If you're interviewing another podcast, like if you're interviewing me, there's not a lot about me. There's not much to work on. But if you're bringing on, somebody who's at the top tier level, they're a legendary figure, they're going legendary status, you got to find everything about them. And from my standpoint, my goal is I want to find something that catches them off guard. That my research was so deep that I even caught them off guard. And it could be something super cheesy, super random, but the look you get from that person is just priceless when you ask them about it. And I asked Chris, he had a cameo, a very, very brief, 30-second cameo in this comedy movie called Rat Race in 2001. Chris has a very, very brief cameo where he's making fun of Cuba Gooding Jr.'s character, who is this referee who screws up a coin toss, and now the referee's gone into hiding. As one of the many, many subplots of this movie. And Chris is making fun of him, and I said, I want to ask you a question real quick. What were you doing when somebody came to you and said, I want you to do a cameo for a movie called Rat Race? And it was just so random and so deep research that you could see it caught him off guard. The video's on our YouTube page. You go find that in there. It's probably about 10 minutes into it. It caught him off guard that he couldn't believe that somebody was asking him about a 30-second cameo in a movie he made 20 years ago. And it's the things like that just it shows them too that, you did your homework. You being able to put together an outline of the process you're going to go through and share the outline. You don't have to share all the questions with them, but share the outline with them and say, this is where I want to go with it. And this is what I want to ask you about. And these are the things I want to talk to you about. And that really goes a long way to, one, having a good interview, but two, it also sets you up for the future too, because if you go and ask another Fox colleague of his and say, hey, I sat down with Chris, in last year and we did an interview, there could be a chance where this person reaches out and says, hey, do you remember these guys? And it's like, if they had a favorable, he had a favorable experience with us, which I think he did.
Yeah.
I
hope so.
I think he did. He's going to be like, yeah, sure, they're great. And, that's just going to get you more and more famous people. Especially someone who's been around the industry a long time and knows a lot of people.
Did you notice any kind of listener bump after these episodes with Chris Myers, John Anderson, those sorts of people?
On the video side, not so much, because we found out the hard way that people don't want to sit through 45-minute, 60-minute long YouTube videos of just random people interviewing. I mean, on the podcast side, it still blows my mind to this day. I stumbled upon Bernard Pollard, who Purdue guy as well.
Yep, NFL player.
Yeah, NFL player. He's. I stumbled across where we followed him on Twitter after I had a random conversation saying, I wonder what Bernard Pollard's up to. And I found him, I followed him on Twitter. He managed to follow us back, and then we started trading DMs. And so I have him on the show. This is when we were just doing straight audio. That episode to date has had 50,000 listeners.
Wow.
And
I mean, that's a ton.
It's a ton. And I can't, and I don't know why. I mean, our other episodes have done very well. I've interviewed, some pretty big name people in the sports world over the last few years, but it just blows my mind where I look, I'm just like, I'm a nobody. And I sat down with a professional athlete, wins the Super Bowl, and 50,000, you're telling me 50,000 people downloaded this episode and listened to at least some of it? I feel like it was a mistake, but it happened.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a big number. Do you use any kind of notes or an outline or anything while you're recording?
100%.
Yeah. What do those look like? What are you preparing?
It's nothing complicated. So I put together a show outline, and I have about 10 bullet points in here of what to talk, or, just some of his key points. And it's like, okay, so he hosted a talk radio show at 16 years old. He, at 16 years old, interviewed Muhammad Ali and the legendary Don Shula growing up in Miami. And, he worked local TV in Miami and New Orleans before he moved on to ESPN and Fox Sports. Know the path that they went on is critical to a good interview that I've learned. He's written multiple books. He has an Emmy Award, and it was hilarious too because he was interviewing us from his home office, and you could see the Emmy Award on his bookshelf behind him when we were talking to him. So, like, we have an Emmy Award winner on our show here.
Yeah.
I've got in this bullet points. He said he's covered the Super Bowl. He calls play-by-play games for Fox NFL. He's calls baseball games. He's covered the World Series with Fox. He's covered the Masters. He's been on the Final Four, covering the Final Four. He's covered the Olympics. He's covered boxing events. He is credited with the last interview of John Wooden. And I had 30 minutes with him, and I was going to pack everything I could into that 30 minutes. And, we go through and ask, toss out a softball right away. And I said, what point in your life did you know this was what you wanted to do? I always ask that of people that get into TV, into journalism or into broadcasting. I'm curious, what was that defining moment for you? And I do recall him that, he was that kid who called into sports radio talk shows all the time as the callers, and he kept calling and calling and calling. And then they let him come down to the studio and do like a late night, Saturday night thing at 16. And that's how he got into that role. And he went into that first bullet point and told us the story behind it. And the radio station sent him to a press conference where he asked Muhammad Ali questions in the press conference. And
so it sounds like you put together something of a resume or a CV maybe of your guest. Do you have anything else on there, or is that these are notes that you have about the person, and then you're trying to think of questions as you go?
And so that's it. Is you don't want to sound too scripted. You got that outline to kind of drive the flow, but of course they're going to make comments, or they're going to say something that's going to pique your attention, where you got to get that good follow up, or get them to go a little deeper into that, or take a turn that you weren't expecting. And being able to give a good follow up is just as good as having a good organized outline. Just because you get that depth, and people want to hear that depth, and being able to finish off the interview talking about, what should kids do today that want to be in your seat in 10, 15 years? Like what kind of advice would you give? And unfortunately, I don't remember what his advice was, but you can always go back and listen if you're curious.
So on that point a little bit, have you read any books or watched anything that's helped you learn how to interview people or how to make your show? What have you done to improve your skills as a podcaster or an interviewer beyond just experience? Or has it just been, because you've been making these for however long you've been making them, that you've kind of figured this out?
It's all of the above. One of the books that I purchased early on, it's called Big Podcast. The author is David Hooper, Hooper. If you've never done a podcast before, this book is 400 pages long. It's a physically smaller book, so it's not that bad of a read. If you've never done a podcast before, I'm holding the book in my hand right now, read it. If you've podcasted before, consider yourself a fairly decent podcaster, skim it, because there is still a lot of good information in there. And especially after you start building up a little bit of listenership, you build up and you want to start getting into trying to track down sponsors for your show, then they give you some of the kind of the basic steps that you want to take to do that. And one, that was a good thing. Number two is study the best. We decided that we want to study podcast or study interviewing, or treat it as an interview show. Chris Myers, one of the best. He's been interviewing people for many, many years. Like I said, he had O.J. Simpson.
Yep.
Another person that I've studied extensively is Howard Stern.
Yeah.
As crude as some of his humor is, and some of the things he's done and said over the years, Howard is an amazing interviewer, because one, the thing I steal from Howard is that he is always, he tries to find those little nitty things, that the little nitty gritty fine details that other interviewers miss. And he'll get into hour-long discussions about those tiny little details. And it's almost always super compelling to hear that side. And he'll get into topics, and, an example of several years back, he had Conan O'Brien on as a guest. And they ended up having a pretty extensive discussion about the mental health issues that both of them had gone through. And Conan admitted, which I don't think he'd ever admitted this in public before, that he was on antidepressants and had been on antidepressants for years. And that a lot of people in the comedy world are. And this is something that, now that we're starting to get a little bit better on that topic, but this was just groundbreaking at the time, 10 years ago. Like, people didn't talk about this, especially, baby boomer adults.
Yeah.
And they still don't to this day. And the fact that they had a very extensive conversation, and Howard's always been very open about himself and going to therapy for years. And it's just super compelling to get into those topics and dive deep into them. It just give a different perspective than like, hey, the same surface level things you hear from a lot of interviewers.
So beyond Howard Stern, do you have any particular show or host that you are trying to emulate, maybe, or that you're looking up to?
So this is a lesser known. I have to give a shout out here to, most people know who Gilbert Gottfried is.
Yeah.
He's got the
voice,
screechy voice. Yeah, everybody knows Gilbert's
I
voice.
thought
Even
about
if you don't know
trying it, but I backed away. I'm glad that you tried it.
Yeah, I'll never, it's to the point I'll never say no to trying impressions or anything like that. But, Gilbert has been on a podcast for years, and and it's a running joke that Gilbert will come into the studio and he won't even know who they're interviewing that day. Sometimes he's never even heard of the person that they're interviewing. His co-host is a comedy writer. His name is Frank Santopadre. It's one of those, like, people in comedy know who he is, but the average person doesn't. But his work. He's one of those people, and he is another one of those brilliant interviewers where his goal is to get the guest to say, how did you know about that?
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I stole that from. I have to give Frank his props there. I mean, he's just an amazing researcher, and just he gets into those topics where he lets the guest drive the conversation, but he'll get in and find those topics that drive that conversation. And that's really what I emulate as well.
Is this the Amazing Colossal podcast?
It is, yes.
Okay.
They kind of strive themselves to be kind of that archive of old Hollywood where they bring on old actors and writers, and Norman Lear is a famous one. He's still, he's like 99 now, and he's still like producing TV shows. He did like All in the Family. I think The Jeffersons. Well, I hope I got that right.
Somebody will fact check it. Somebody will double check it.
Yeah, somebody fact check me, please.
Yeah.
But
leave a comment somewhere. Maybe we'll see it.
Norman Lear, they bring these people in that, like, people our age may not be familiar with, but they bring these people in and they want to introduce them to a new generation of listeners. Like, you got these 99-year-old people that were writing on TV in the 1950s, 1960s, and it's like, okay, I've heard of him, I've heard his name before, but I didn't know really anything about him. Yep. And then you hear him, it's like, wow, this guy is just incredible. He's an amazing guy. He's just done amazing work over the years, and it's just, they're in like episode 300 now or so.
On your podcast, you work with a couple other co-hosts. Who are they, and how did you meet and bring them into your show? So there's only one co-host now. Okay.
We had two at one point. It's just, we kind of went our own ways. There was nothing wrong. It's just, it wasn't, the other host was not, they were doing other things.
Sure. It happens.
Yeah, it happens. But my primary partner in this, her name is Kate Thompson, and she reluctantly agreed to podcasting. She has reluctantly agreed to getting on video because she just does not like the sound of her voice. She doesn't like seeing herself on camera. She'll admit herself she's a little bit of a shy personality, and the only reason she agreed to do this is because she thought it was going to help with some of those confidence things. I kind of, by default, have kind of become the face of Stadium Scene, but Kate is behind the scenes, one, keeping me in line, or trying to keep me in line. And if she was listening to this right now, I'm sure she would have texted me a dozen times, "Shut up, you're rambling." She does that when we record. Like, I'll have my phone sitting here, and all of a sudden a text message will pop up from her and say, "You're rambling."
Yeah.
She doesn't want to interrupt the show, but she'll give me a subtle kick. Okay, come on, let's get back on topic here. But she's the one I worked with. We worked in an office together when I was still living in Illinois. Most this concept all didn't come together until after I moved out here to Arizona. We kept it going, and it's way better than what it was when we started. A lot of times, I'll pitch ideas and she'll pull me back, like, okay, let's take this one step at a time. Because if it was completely up to me, this probably would have flopped by now, because I have a little bit of, discipline problems when it comes to like focusing on a strategic plan. She's very strategic plan.
I was going to ask you if you think the podcast would still be going on if it was just you.
Probably not.
No.
Our podcast is actually we'll say evolved again. We've done, I think, 107 episodes now. We're trying to focus on this year on quality over quantity, I guess is our theme for this year. And we're working on building up that library of that training library. I talked about earlier with the how to get famous guests on your show.
Yeah.
We talked about, building tutorials on how to put your blog or show your blog as Pinterest pins. That's another classic example that we've worked on. We're both technology people. We're both engineers by trade, and a lot of publishers and people that talk are not. We're trying to bridge that gap between people who talk and people who are technical.
Speaking of the technical side of things, did you have any kind of history with audio recording before you got into podcasting?
Well, no.
Did you find podcasting, starting it to be difficult because of that?
No, actually, so this isn't my first rodeo when it comes to podcasting. Back in 2005, when like the whole podcast thing kind of started, and you have to sync your iPod to your computer to download your podcasts, and then you listen on the go. So I was working at an internship for a company. My friend was a regional sales manager for a small company, and I was hired as an intern to do like 2D CAD drawings of their work, of their products, so that they can put them into like marketing materials. And they didn't give me a lot of direction, and there was a lot of downtime. And we figured we had a couple hours to kill, and he's like, "Hey, check this GarageBand thing I found on here." And we just hit record, and we started kind of just reading the news and making fun of news stories and making fun of people in the news stories. And then we saved it as a podcast, and it was a lot harder to publish a podcast back then. You didn't have, Anchor, or I'm blanking on some of the other hosts out there.
Yeah.
But you didn't have these companies where it's like, okay, you just upload this file, record the audio on your iPhone or your Android phone, and then next thing you know, it's on 10 different podcast platforms. Like, you had to create the file and code the RSS file yourself.
Yeah.
And
put it in iTunes. I think I tried to do something like that at one point.
I had to actually buy a website and put the podcast on there, and then you'd have the web
Your
analytics.
server would feed it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it was a pain. And we did 20 episodes or something like that summer, where we're just reading the news, and then we'd have people call us on Skype, and we'd just talk to random people that we knew, and just tell dumb stories, and that was kind of my first visit into podcasting. And that was 10, 12 years later. When I started doing this, it was so much easier for me that I could just jump right into it, because I went through that pain over a decade before. So it was actually pretty easy for me to get back into it. I mean, finding that rapport and the quality of content obviously took a lot longer. But as far as the technical aspect and recording it, we've gone through a couple different methods.
Yeah, what are you using right now? What are you using to record? What's your microphone? What's your software? What do you have going?
So I've got a Blue USB microphone. I splurged years ago on that for I don't know why, and I had it sitting in a box, and I'm like, well, I guess I'm going to use this thing now. So this Blue brand microphone has been my trusty podcasting sidekick now for the last 6 years. Recording it, we would use GarageBand to record when we were an audio-based show. When Apple allowed you to take calls on your MacBook, we get people on the phone, and sometimes we use Skype. If people, some of our early guests, we would just call them on the phone, and then just patch it through to the MacBook and just record that as a channel on, in GarageBand. But since the pandemic started, when we started doing a video-based version, we just hit record in Zoom and say heck with it. I mean, I'm not. I've learned that you may have the best technical sounding podcast ever. If the content sucks,
Yep.
nobody's going to listen. And yeah, there's some issues with Zoom, and the camera on the MacBook isn't great, but and it makes it easy. Like, it's a lot easier for me to hop on a Zoom call with somebody, or even some of the older guests who are not super technologically inclined, and I'm not naming names here. You send them a Zoom link, they can get onto Zoom on their iPhone and talk to us on their phone. And it makes it really easy to record. And we can focus, instead of making sure that all the technical pieces work and everybody can hear each other, you get everybody on Zoom, you hit record, and you can focus on making the best quality show as far as interviewing and content and flow go.
You guys have, if I'm remembering this right, you have like lower thirds and graphics and stuff on your video, don't you?
Yeah.
How are you doing that with Zoom?
So that's all post production.
Oh, okay.
I use a software package called Wondershare Filmora. I would say it's a bit better than iMovie, but not quite up to like the professional level of editing. But it's really simple to use, and so I'll take the Zoom video on there and I'll throw it into Filmora. Throw a title card on the front. We made our little introduction using some stock footage of, at the beginning, it's a flyover of downtown Phoenix.
Yep.
And then it cuts over to a flyover of Lakeshore Drive in Chicago, which represents, me for Phoenix, Kate for Chicago, because that's where she lives. And, it really shows, with stock footage, you put like a blue filter on it, makes it look cool.
Yeah.
I mean, it was really, I learned how to do it playing around with it for about 20 minutes. I mean, I'm not getting super involved in the technical aspect, and there's plenty of mistakes, and you can tell the editing is pretty amateurish on the video front. But like I said, people generally will forgive you for the little technical mistakes. I mean, there's a few people out there who will nitpick on things like that, but people are there for the content. And if you're providing good content, it doesn't sound like a staticky AM radio, they're going to stick around.
Do you do any editing on your episodes beyond just popping it into that video program?
Oh yeah. I mean, if there's we have technical moments with Zoom where somebody will lock up and disappear. I mean, I'll cut that out.
Yeah.
With the audio side, Zoom makes the MP3 file that I bring into GarageBand, and I'll put the intro on and the exit music on it, and clean that up a little bit. Do a tiny little bit of editing on the sound to kind of balance it out, because I'm naturally loud. Sorry for your editing.
No, I've got you pretty balanced.
I'm naturally loud. Kate's naturally soft. So trying to balance the two of us out can be a challenge sometime. But that's really about it.
Do you batch any episodes? Like, do you do multiple interviews in a day and have a couple stashed up, or is it one at a time?
We tried that for a while. So from March 2020 to let's see, from about March 2020 till about April 2021, we put out a new episode every single week.
Yep.
And like over the Christmas time, we did a best of episode where Kate and I talked for like 10 minutes and just did like a brief, like, oh, this is my favorite moment from the year. And, let's cut back to when we talked to John Anderson.
Do you have any favorite lesson, or what would you say is the most important lessons that you've learned about podcasting since you started?
So I would say one is be prompt, whether you're the guest or the interviewer. Don't be late, no matter which position you're in. Show up on time. Second is just be aware of their time. If the guest makes it clear to you that they have 20 minutes or they have half an hour, you make sure that you get that done in 20 minutes or a half hour. Have a stopwatch running. Know your time that you can get through and keep things moving along. Being able to hold them to that schedule. One, abruptly ending your episode midway through because your guest has to go is awkward.
Yeah.
For one. But two, it shows preparation from your standpoint that you plan this out. You got it all the way through. The third thing is prepare. If your guest, even if your guest isn't famous, if they're a podcaster, they've done 30 episodes or so, go through and look at their episodes, listen to a couple of them. understand their style, understand what they like to talk about, understand kind of, the theme of their show. And getting that basic understanding of their perspective in their show is going to give you a much better perspective as far as interviewing that person. If they're famous, obviously, you can go and you can start at Wikipedia and just drill down from there, and you could get endless amounts of information and talk to a person all day. But know your guest, regardless of if they're famous or not.
I think that's really good advice. DJ, I have a ton of questions that we didn't have a chance to get to. We are at the hour and a half limit that I have set for this evening. Is there anything else that we should talk about? Did we miss anything that you really wanted to cover that I didn't ask you?
I mean, the big thing with Stadium Scene is, we work, like I said, it's a business. We're out to make money off the deal, but it's also a community. All of our members come in, they have access to everybody's contact information inside the network. If you need a guest, if you want to go and reach out to somebody else's show, you get yourself out there. We make that available regardless of if you're a free or a paid customer. We think that being able to leverage those resources off of each other is going to be the quickest way to get that initial growth for you. It's a ton of work. There's no magic solution that you're going to come out here and this is going to build up your followers, as I've said many times throughout this episode. But if you're willing to put in the work and use those resources around you, get those guests, get yourself out there, put your name out there, you're going to have a much better chance of being successful.
Cool. I think that's great advice. Where can people find you? Where do you want to send people?
All right, so check us out at stadiumscene.tv. That's the website. You can check out our 211 partners spread across 8 countries. The only continent we are not in is South America. At Stadium Scene on Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, TikTok, YouTube, Twitch. At Stadium_Scene on Instagram, because someone beat us to the Stadium Scene handle somehow years ago. Even though they haven't posted on it since 2015. We're getting into live video, actually. This is going to be after this airs, but we're actually doing our first live esports shows.
Cool.
And so we're getting into the iRacing, and we're going to have a broadcast team doing the play-by-play of the event. I'll be participating as a driver in it. But we're going to try to do some live video moving in 2022, and check out. It's called Wednesday Night Dash. Airs at 10 p.m. East, 7 Pacific on twitch.tv/Stadium Scene and YouTube. Search Stadium Scene. You'll find it. Replays will be available right after the episode airs. So check that out. We're on most Wednesday nights.
Awesome. I'll probably check that out. I enjoy watching some of that stuff. So thanks for sharing that, and thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing all of this awesome information about your podcast. I really appreciate it, and it was nice to reconnect with you again.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate you having me on.
That was my conversation with DJ Fluck, electrical engineer, aspiring media mogul, and host of Stadium Scene's Main Event podcast, which can be found on all of the major podcast networks. You can also find DJ at stadiumscene.tv. My name is Chris Cookley, and you can find me at whomakesapodcast.com. If you enjoyed this episode, it would be an enormous help if you shared it with your friends or left a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening right now. It really does make a difference. And if you host a podcast and would like to be my next guest on Who Makes a Podcast, let me know. Go to whomakesapodcast.com/guest and tell me about your show. This is Who Makes a Podcast. I'll be back next time with another conversation with another incredible podcast host. Thanks for listening.